We'll get going soon. As soon as I get some windows loaded. Alright, welcome to Made Up of Wires. We've been decompiling Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and we're going to continue doing that today. This is a very special Labor Day broadcast from the United States. I have my Labor Day decorations in place. In the US, if you're not from the US, we consider Labor Day kind of the last hurrah of summer going into the fall. And it's mostly thought of as just a American, Memorial Day, Independence Day kind of celebration, but originally dedicated to celebrating the worker. And that's what we're doing today, just a little bit of work. We have been decompiling weapons, and we're gonna try to work on that a little bit today. I think today's going to be a shorter stream. I won't go a full hour and a half, and we probably won't get to the finish of any of these because the remaining weapon functions are harder and take a little longer to do. But we can start one and see how it goes. If you're not familiar with the Castlevania Symphony of the Night decompilation project, you can go to SOTN.z.dev, where you can see the progress of some of the modules that have been started. Not everything is being currently worked on, and the things that are being worked on are nearing various stages of completion. So the main game engine has one function left, and there's several attempts to decompile that. I think there is, I haven't looked lately, but maybe somewhere around high 80s, low 90s match for the remaining function there. The Richter program that allows you to play as Richter in the game, that has been fully decompiled, and it has been, all the data has also been extracted, so it's fully portable, meaning any part of that code can be changed and recompiled without affecting memory addresses and offsets that could cause problems elsewhere. We're working on weapons. There's about 10 weapons left if you include the one that I sent out for PR this morning. And that will finish off the first weapon object. There's 2 weapon overlays, and this is the first of 2. They're both about the same number of weapons included. And then there's been a bunch of stages. Many of the stages that we've started have been decompiled. NO3 is one of the exceptions where there's quite a bit still that needs to be worked on. NO3 is when you enter the castle as Alucard for the first time. And ST0 I know has some work to be done there as well. ST0 is the stage when you're playing as Richter. And if you watched on Thursday, we went through and set some breakpoints to try to determine what some of the functions were there that haven't been named yet. So I have a little table of remaining weapon functions that we can look at to see what's remaining. And normally in the stream I'd go through and look for, oh, that doesn't look very nice in normally I'd go through and find the smallest function and then decompile that, or find a function that's been duplicated and work on that. Today I'm going to be a little more strategic about the function that I look for. I know that some of them are large. I know that some of them are being worked on by other people, and I don't want to really do work that I know other people are working on. I may look at some of these. So weapon 30, those are all pretty long. There's still one in weapon 50, it looks like, that's partially complete. That might be a good one to do. I submitted this weapon 50 004 pointer, or, 004 function earlier this morning. And so that might be a good place to continue on, sticking with weapon 50. And we can round that out. Let me make sure that that is indeed the one that's there. It is. So this is going to be a function that is already partially decompiled. And if there's a name associated with it, I'll leave that to the author that's currently working on it. So this one, when you, on decomp.me, when a function has been worked on by somebody who's not signed in, it shows up as a non. Sometimes I have a pretty good feeling of who those anons are, and try to stay away from those as well. Not because I don't want to work on that or finish it. If somebody's in the process of working on something, I know that personally, if I was working on something and somebody came in and grabbed my work and then submitted it, that would irk me. So I try not to do that to other people as well. We could look at the family here as well and see who else has been working on it. So Josh has been working on it. I might check Discord really quick to see if this is one of the functions that he has listed. I don't think it is. So he had been working on 14, 44, and 47, and 16. And so this has sat for about 2 weeks. So I think I feel okay going through and trying to tweak this and work it. So we'll fork this one and try to continue on. It's nice starting with some of these that have been started already. I know some of the issues here based on the work that was done in the 004 function, things that will work to get this function in line, and so we can tweak that. And hopefully actually get a match pretty quickly. There are, in this case, there are PSP versions of this function. This is the PlayStation version of the function. There's PSP versions that aren't quite matching for reasons that I'm not quite sure of yet. In some cases, I found for the 004 version of this function that there were function signatures that were incorrect to related functions in this same weapon. Sorry, I should be showing you this decomp.me screen. So the PSP version did help identify some function signature issues that were already checked in that made getting a perfect match difficult. But there were still things, even with the PSP version, where something close in the PSP version didn't match at all in the PlayStation version, and that happens from time to time. I'm going to go back over here, and we'll look to see where this slots in. So this is one of the last of the implemented functions. I've talked about this in the past, but weapons are set up so that there's a struct that contains basically several weapon functions, and then the game engine or the stages overlays can call into those functions. And we can look at what that looks like. I believe that's in this header file. So the one that we have named is entity weapon attack. There's also a shield spell function that only a handful of weapons implement. So we have this weapon overlay, and effectively all of these functions are exported. They're at this this particular structure is at a known address, which is right at the beginning of this overlay. And when that's loaded, then those address offsets to each of these pointers is known, and these pointers point to the functions that are defined. And that's what the where these names come from. This is the function pointer that exists at this particular address in memory, but it points to a function that's somewhere else, and we just name it this for consistency across all the weapons. Let's look at that structure to see what that looks like. So we have this weapon structure. It looks a lot like many of the other overlay structures that we have, where it's effectively a series of function pointers that give us some type of polymorphism then in a language that otherwise wouldn't give us polymorphism. We don't know necessarily, because we're decompiling, we don't have names for any of these symbols, so we have to come up with these names as we're determining what the function is. And so after entity weapon attack, which is the primary attack function, there's a series of optional functions that get called, and we can look at some of the code that calls those. And there hasn't been work yet to go through and name these functions. So this is somewhat interesting. So these are particularly related to axe armor. Different weapon functions are going to be executed. And let's look again at what weapon 50 was. So this is Icebrand, and we worked on Icebrand, I think, in the past. All right, so we'll go back and start decompiling. Our goal when we're decompiling is to get our C code here to match the target assembly on the left, and the current state of our function is here on the right. And so we have a little progress bar at the top that's going to tell us if we're getting closer or further. And the goal obviously is to try to get, try to get closer. I'm having worked a bunch in the not only weapons recently, but also the PSP version of the weapons. I'm going to be making some changes that I know, or have a at least strong inclination that these changes will help with the PSP version. And if we get stuck, we can pull in the PSP version as well. So I'm going to fork this, since this was done by a friendly wombat. And the first thing I'm going to do is just start cleaning some things up to my preferred code style, and part of it is on stream here where I have a narrow window, making sure everything is readable. So the first thing I did that was a functional change was to change this player unknown 46 field equal to 0 to a not. We see this in the PSP quite a bit. The PSP will generate different instructions when doing a not against this 16-bit value versus doing an equality check against 0. And within, so that's specifically in the no optimization case, which for these weapons is how the PSP was compiled. So those will generate different instructions, and we want instructions that hopefully will match in both cases. I am going to look here to see where some of the mismatches are. This being the PlayStation version, there is optimization in place. And so sometimes we don't necessarily get to see what is, or how, it's not necessarily obvious what instructions are generated on the right, whether or not they're actually associated with this line here. So in this case, there is a mask with 7F. Really, that appears to be part of this line up here. But because of the way the optimizing compiler works, the lines get mixed around, and we can't necessarily trust the lines over here. If we pulled the PSP version in, we have a better chance of lines matching. So there is some issue here with how this is being done. This may be because this is being cast as opposed to actually having an AND against this value. Upper params here is being defined as a 32-bit value. When params is pulled out of an entity, we usually don't see it as a 32-bit. Usually it's assigned 16. So that may or may not be an issue. And I'm going to change it to assigned 16, and I'm going to rename it params as well. For consistency with the rest of the code, and because I think that might help. And so that does change some. And so getting rid of that shift appears to allow these lines to match. There's still register mismatch. But we'll look at that in a bit. Okay, so then down on line 43, usually I don't go through and look at the assembly this in depth right away, but because this function is already mostly decompiled, this is the time when we have to kind of look at those details and see what it might be. All right, so there's a missing load word at offset 18. So let's look at the entity and see what field is at offset 18, which is draw mode. So there's a draw mode field that isn't, or that's being loaded and not being set. So here we're checking params against this value, but it appears that it's actually being checked against draw mode. Maybe not. So it's, sorry, it's sometimes I fail to see these things, but this is looking at offset 18 of the stack pointer. And so in our original assembly, this offset 18 is being read up here on what is our line 35. Switches are often at a high optimization level, combinations of several different lines, and so it's difficult to parse out a lot of times what exactly this might be. I'm going to look for other places that offset 18 is being used. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. So down here around line 82, and so this does look like params. So it is possible that that this was a signed 32 or unsigned 32, and so I changed it to a 16, assuming that this matched other other functions, but it doesn't look like that was necessarily the case. So here is an interesting thing as well, and so I see why they did the shift originally. So they so this is loading a byte at offset 31, but this is a 16-bit value. So we can't load that directly. So I'm going to attempt to cast that. But that doesn't seem to help. It would be assigned anyway. And this is one of the reasons that many of these haven't been done yet, is because there certainly is some challenge in some of these that doesn't exist in many of the other ones that we had done. Does that look better? It doesn't. There's still these out of order. I think it might be a good time to look at the PSP version, and we can see. I have this. So first we have to find the PSP version, which can be difficult by itself. So what I like to do when comparing the PlayStation and PSP version is first look at the approximate size of the PS1 version, which is around 16K, and the PSP version, because it's compiled without optimizations, is always slightly bigger. So I'm looking at weapon. The way these are broken up is different between the two. So I'm going to be looking for all of the non-matching assembly files. And I'm going to, like I normally do when I'm looking for what to decompile next, sort these by size using awk and find and sort. And so there's two functions that are slightly larger. One of these I was just decompiling for the 004 function, and so my guess is that this is the other one, but let me double check so I don't pull in the wrong one. So yeah, I was working on this 3DD0, and so the 4DD8 is going to be likely going to be the function that that we want. Hey Restokin, nice to have you. We're just doing a quick decompile today. It's a US holiday, so I'm going to go spend time with my family. But I thought we could try to get through most of it. So again, what I've copied this assembly from the PSP version, and I'm going to create a new scratch with the PSP version, Castlevania Symphony of the Night preset. And then I'm not very interested in how the PSP was decompiled. I might look at the decomp that's auto-generated, but I want to take the PlayStation version that has been worked on and paste it into the PSP scratch, because then we can get a sense of how close some of these things are, and the PSP version should hopefully shed some light on where things have gone wrong. Oh, nice. Good to see other Hacker News people around. I actually started doing this stream because of comments on Hacker News. I asked if people would be interested in live decompiling of old games, and it seemed like there was some interest. And so, yeah, here we are. So we're working on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and kind of switching between the PlayStation version and the PSP version. Most of the code between the two games is shared. And so we have different levels of optimization in different compilers that we have assembly for. And so between those two versions, then we can kind of compare and tweak and narrow in on what the what some compatible code might look like that can compile both for MetroWorks and for GCC at different optimization levels too. All right, so looking at, there's still this issue here where params is being stored as a 32-bit value. Sometimes this happens as well on the, well, this won't necessarily be the case here. There are often times on the PSP version where params is extracted and then not used, but because there's no optimizations in the MetroWorks compiler, the code is still generated for that store onto the stack. In this case, however, it looks like this value is being stuck into a register, and let's see where it's used. Down here on line 44. So it is being pulled out. Let's see what the decompiler would have generated here. It's generating a funny mask that seems unnecessary. We can try it. An overly complicated mask like this, I've usually is simplified to something. I mean, that doesn't make sense to mask twice. I'm going to move past that, and we'll keep going. There is differences between structs. On the PlayStation version and the PSP version. And I was looking into, these are stack differences as well. I was looking into why the primitive structure, for example, might be different between the PlayStation and the PSP version. In the PlayStation version, the primitive is based on the Poly GT4 structure that comes from the PSP SDK. it takes some of the padding fields there and gives them meaning, so that additional data can be passed around along with that that polygon data. In the PSP version, those structs, as far as I could tell, are not the polygt4 struct is not defined as part of something in the SDK, and so there might be like the PlayStation BIOS and everything, but otherwise it would rely on those portions of the SDK coming in through what was compiled on those PlayStation binaries. So it can execute that code if it came precompiled, but it doesn't provide that as part of the SDK. Okay, so down here on line 47, there's a bunch of, there's some loads that are missing that we don't have. Let's see. So we're loading offset 38 and sticking it into 3E. I might like to see where else these stack offsets are used to try to determine if there's a way we can infer what that might be. Let's 44. So here on line 45, we're using, our offsets are off for what these stack values are. Basically, we're setting up the arguments in registers, and where the original used something at offset 38, we're using 54. Typically, that means the way that variables have been pulled out isn't the same. Again, on PSP, we get a very literal translation of these unoptimized overlays. So we need to match that. There's some details there that may be possible to get kind of by grinding through. There's some more macro changes that we can do. I think that'll get us closer, and then we can worry about those details. Sometimes those details fall out in the meantime. So down here, there's a do-while loop that's looking for the difference between pointer addresses and iterating over this pointer. This was something that was in an earlier function for this weapon, where really this is iterating the number of primitives that have been allocated for this particular animation. And what we want to do instead is, and where's this primitive count being set? Got it, 8. What we want to do is just a standard for loop and use array access to access that array instead of using the addresses. The reason that the person who originally wrote this wrote it the way that they did was because this is how GCC at optimization level 2 generates this code. it generates it as incrementing over register as opposed to accessing it as an array. So pointer y. And I believe that these names may have been off a bit. Yeah. So they had named x, y, and yx. That's okay. We can fix that. And we'll need to go through and clean a bunch of this up. Hey, Eldritch. Funny story. Where you're involved, but you don't know it. I was taking a nap the other day, and as I do from time to time, I had one of the Dragon Blitz daily streams on in the background from a tournament you guys ran last week, or maybe it was the weekend before. And I just so happened to wake up, and you were talking about this stream, and about how death steals all the things, and I thought it was serendipitous that I caught exactly that part of the stream when I had slept through the first hour. So thank you. Any promotion for this stream is appreciated. So here we are. Also setting this x value. We're doing just a short stream today. It being a holiday weekend. Trying to finish off what we can. I don't think we know the size of that array. It's got to be 8 though, because we're not going to do any more than 8. And I'm just generating a mess here. Down on line 70. We're not happy. Got it. So many of these are based on the assumption that this was not a structured array, but based on other work that I'd done, it is structured, and we can probably pull a bunch of these things out. So here, point x. Got it. So this is coming from these functions here, sp28. So it looks like this is going to be a random value plus the x value divided by 8. This was a function that was mostly done, and I'm just trying to get to completion to it. Okay, that helped quite a bit. And actually, I'm going to pull up, this is the PlayStation version, the other function in here, which may help as well. Maybe not as much as I had hoped. All right, we'll keep going. Actually, this looks like it is setting up and manipulating this array that then is being used in this other function as well. This could be a good time as well to pull up the... Oh, I don't have the Castlevania wiki open. So this is Icebrand. I like to look at the weapons and see if watching their animation can help at all. The wiki only has the Donosaro animations. Getting the DS games in a compilation is pretty awesome, and I'm excited to check those out. I have Dawn of Sorrow and the other one that's not Order of Ecclesia. But I don't believe I've played through either of them, at least not completely. I've played through 2 of the DS games and enjoyed both of those. All right. So from time to time, I'll also go through and looking at the PSP version, and especially since we're getting closer, copy that over back to the PlayStation version and see if that's getting closer or further. In this case, I know that there's some issues here related to this logic that needs to be resolved. And so it doesn't quite match up. Oh, Ice Sword. Interesting. Okay, let me pull that up. Thank you. Man, look at that. Such beautiful effects for a 2D game relying on a lot of 3D hardware to draw. Alright, so let's get into this down here on line 69. So where Dragon Blitz would make a joke. The MetroWorks compiler is interesting and not something that I've worked with prior to this. Okay, so it looks like point is being multiplied by where we are in this iteration. And so GCC writes that effectively as an addition, because it knows every loop it's going to be going up by this particular value. Looking at MetroWorks, this multiplication then is being done basically each iteration. There's quite a few things being done prior to setting this up. These one of the things that I've noticed throughout the code base and that the decompiler will put in, but doesn't make sense necessarily when you're thinking about these as different geometric operations. You'll see that the compiler replaces a divide by 8 with a shift right arithmetic by 3. And that's a single instruction, whereas if it had to do a division versus something that wasn't a power of 2, would have to generate either a lot more instructions or use a more expensive instruction. But sometimes people working on the decompile will leave those in as shifts, which usually, when you're thinking about it as some way to generate some geometry, doesn't make a lot of sense. I got rid of this temp v0, which appears to have been a mistake. Okay, so this was a rand mod 4. The PSP version is much more sensitive to the ordering of operations. It looks like this rand is added later. So I'm actually going to do all of these first. And this is looking a bit like what was being done down here. But not quite. That rand is not... not being done right there. Okay, so this is a match except for registers. There is a SEH is a sign extend, so this is conversion between a 16 and 32-bit value signed. So it does look like these are both being calculated and then assigned. So there is an addition that's missing. So our S3 register is this point Y point. So there's another multiply that's missing. At this point it's 0, but oh, that's multiplied by I. Okay. We already have one multiply by I in there, but it does look like there is a second. I'm just trying to figure out if this is a second block or not, but I don't think it is. Let's pull this back in. And let's go back to the decomp and see. So we're doing multiplication versus, in this case, it does look like the value of this point is pulled out into a separate variable. So we'll use that, and I won't rename it yet. We'll call it X in the future, but and then divided by. In many of these cases, these branches are generated by the division or multiplication to handle overflows and divide by 0 scenarios. In this case, we are dividing by a fixed value, though, so it's not necessarily unknown. This rand is definitely not part of this line. We're loading offset 3e in the original. 3e was originally, I believe, this this particular point value, the x offset. So we don't control that directly, so I'm not too worried about that at the moment. I had this as point x, though, and was that more correct? Yeah, that was more correct. Somewhat strange, however, that this base x it is not happy with. Let's look at what type that is. Let's change that to a 16. The original is a 16-bit. That didn't help. So we're missing some a second multiplication. It looks like there's an additional add of 8 versus oh, so this may be this I'm looking at the entity structure. Let's try this. Let's do self pos x high. It's a pointer. Oh, that's base x. So base x plus 8. Okay, so that's getting closer. And then we're multiplying by S1, which is I. And then dividing that by 8. Got it. So that's slightly closer. We're missing an add. V1 is this shifted value. Oh, did we have another? That's what I was missing. So it looks like maybe I times this. Getting closer. This is part of decompilation that is slow and tedious, and requires attention to detail that may be straightforward, but sometimes not. So it still looks like there may be a 16-bit value or casts to 16-bit values that are missing. So base X and these are already 16. I was seeing this as well in the it appears this the math is correct. I believe. What is incorrect is some of the types that are involved. And so it may be that these intermediate values are 32-bit, but removing that gets rid of some of the sign extensions. It could be that these are being done on separate lines, and so those conversions need to happen multiple times. So something like this may be more accurate. So in this case, that did provide one of the additional sign extension operations, which may be more correct. And then there's something similar going on here. It's probably a very similar construct, so we can try that. This will take a little bit to get through. Oops. That's right. So this one is a little bit different. There's not these divisions. Rand is called much earlier, so these may be all on the same line. And then it looks like, based on this value, yeah, so there's a division happening here. Where it's happening, I'm not sure quite yet. And it may be happening in both these. Whenever, so branches unexpectedly are generated when there are divisions, basically to handle corner cases that the instructions, as executed by the MIPS processor in this case, won't handle. I'm going to leave that part alone and go further down and see if any of these, if there's anything obvious down here that can be fixed. So in this case, this var S6 was changed to an I. This draw mode is out of order with the priority, and so those will fall into place. This var S5 is no longer being used and can be gotten rid of, and the same thing with these down here. Those can be gotten rid of. There's immediate values that are incorrect, but that's because the instructions above don't match. So we don't really have to worry about that particular offset isn't matching at the moment. And so let's keep going and see. S in the difference column means a stack value is incorrect, and typically that means either there. So this is the PSP version. In this case, there may be a variable that was introduced that doesn't need to be there. The PSP version will assign actually consume stack space for unused variables. So whereas the GCC version for the PlayStation 1, if an assignment is being done in code, but then that value is never being used, it's considered dead code and will be eliminated. At the higher optimization levels for PSP, that will happen as well, but this particular overlay is not optimized. So we have to be careful about what we, how we pull out different variables. The PSP version, as I mentioned before, is very literal. Most of the stuff down here is either register differences. It looks like there is a type difference that's happening here. So this function is not defined, and I happen to know from earlier work what the signature is. This is being, because it's not defined, the undeclared function signature is being used, which is that it returns an int and all the parameters are ints. So we need to tell the compiler what this is, and it takes a primitive into 16-bit values, and that'll change then how it sets up arguments on the stack and what the calling convention is. And that may give us hints as well as to whether or not variables are being pulled out. So in this case, we have some loads and sign extensions that we don't, that were in the original that we don't see here. And so we probably need to pull those out into separate variables. So I'm going to, and this happened in that other function too. So I'll make two 32-bit x and y values, or variables, and we'll assign those. And that should hopefully clean those sign extensions up. So that helps most of it. There still are this result is 32-bit. So this I wasn't expecting. Oh, maybe these are 16-bit values. Do we have 16-bit X and Y? We don't. So let's do that. There we go. So then in this case, we want a move as opposed to a sign extension, so our result has to be 16-bit. When this was originally written, the authors had a function signature that indicated that that was a 32-bit return value. That isn't... I expected that to be a move when that was changed, but it's not. This decrement is occurring before the branch. I don't think I can do it here. Yeah, that's not going to work. If we change this to a 32, change the result to a 32, that will turn into a move. I don't think that's the correct signature for that function, though. So kind of an odd scenario here. Let's copy this back over and see if we're getting any closer on the PlayStation version. The goal is, hopefully, to get code that matches both the PlayStation and the PSP version. And we're still further away, which is not unexpected, but I was hoping that as we kind of resolve some of these issues on the PSP version that we'd be getting closer. Let's get back to where we were. We can pull over particular chunks, and I'll do that from time to time as well. So for example, this tail end of this function is almost completely matching on the PSP version, so it's likely that this is mostly correct. So we can move that over and then get some of our variables. And sometimes I have to do this and just kind of piecemeal while I'm trying to get them to converge. So this is going to be somewhat challenging because this is a 0.16, but that's not known yet on the PlayStation side, so I might have to go through and clean those up. So let's go down here and see how the PlayStation is looking. It also informs kind of copying between the two. Gives you a pretty good hint about whether or not the assumptions that you made on one platform are correct. So I'm going to try just passing these directly in as params and see if that makes a difference. In this case, it didn't. So there's 2 loads from this. It looks like so it appears to me that that GCC is only. Oh no, it is loading it twice. Okay, so there's still some tweaking there that's necessary. In this case, this is interesting. So this is, and that was, okay. So that was the issue is, I was decrementing X, but really it's Y that was being decremented here. And let's see how that changes the... It doesn't change the PSP version significantly. It does clean up these immediate values, which were wrong. So that is a nice thing about going between the 2 versions and having 2 examples. Like I said, is we can kind of play them off one another to try to determine what is correct and what's not. I'm going up to see what this next issue is up here. So line 83. Yeah, so there's a bunch here. This is the same issue with this particular function, and let's do that. So I had been using the PSP version because it is more literal to try to go through and determine how this this math up here is being constructed. But in this case, the PlayStation version, even though it's optimized, may be more helpful. The decompiler here is a better, or I should say more accurate decompiler. So when we get the base decompile, in general I find the code to be closer to correct and less tweaking necessary. There's some things that it's definitely more liberal about accepting, but we can take that as the baseline and then go from there. So one of the things that I typically do, if this was a brand new to me decompile, is to go through and replace some of these generated variables with things that make more sense to me. So I'm going to do that first, and I'm not expecting miracles here, but then what I'd like to do is start getting rid of some of these intermediate variables. And often, as those go away and expressions are tightened up, you can either get a better sense of what was attempting to be done. The math makes more sense, in my opinion. I mean, I'm just one guy. Or the way that the expressions are written are something that the compiler will treat differently enough that they can be optimized to match what was originally there. So this is getting us significantly further away. So I may have to back out some of this. What I'm really hoping to see, though, is how are some of these... so I've missed a crucial thing, and that's why these aren't converging at the moment. And I figured this out in the PSP and then forgot it in the subsequent 30 minutes since working there. So the decompiler came in and looked at the optimized code and was tracking this this virus4, which it had set up here to 0, and then was incrementing it by this point y value, for example, every time. And what was more likely is that this was a multiply by y of this particular value, and then we can get rid of this virus4 altogether. And likewise, the virus3 is a multiply of point x by I, and we can get rid of that and get rid of tracking its increment each time as well. I said virus3, right? And we're going to run into the same issue around much of the math that got generated here. Let's do some of the other fixes that I know are going to be an issue. Changing the ordering of those. This virus5 is no longer necessary. This was tracking. This should be offset I. This is just tracking where it is in that array. And so what we're mostly left with, again, is figuring out what how these x and y values are calculated and how to unwrap a bunch of these instructions here. So I'll probably do this offline where I can just kind of sit and stare at it for a while. I'm going to go back up to the top and see if there's anything else that's egregiously one way or another. So there's still an issue with how params is being loaded. The rest of this looks to be reasonably straightforward. arg3 here looks like it's being set as a variable. I'm going to try to pull this out. We do have a branch, which means that a lot of times the way that we would write this, this happens pretty frequently. The way that we would write something isn't necessarily the way another developer even today would write it, and now we have to think about how would a developer have written this 25 years ago, or no, 30 years ago. Okay, so this is this var 18. So this is params. So this goes back to params being we want it to be stored basically just in a register. No, I'm sorry. We want it to be stored on the stack. But our version of this function, for whatever reason, is storing it in a register. It is a bit of an odd construct. I'm going to go over actually and look at the other ice brand code. So here we're extracting effectively the same thing from params, and in this case it's being used as an animation index, and it's only concerned about that second byte, a signed version of that second byte. Most of these functions, as they are in the GitHub repo, were for weapon, were decompiled from the PlayStation version. So we need to consider like what idiosyncrasies there are around how GCC is going to compile that as well. And so even though this is stored as an 8-bit value, that may not be the correct type or the type that it originally was, because of how it's being used. But we can try that on ours and see. There are different characteristics of 8-bit values that I don't see being met. So, for example, it definitely appears that and we had this correct earlier. So we want to convince let's copy this one over. We want to convince the compiler that we want the second byte of this so that it can generate a load byte instruction. In this case, it's still loading it as a 16-bit value and then doing the shift. We did have this loading a byte earlier. And I forget what the order of mask and load was. Let's see if we have that over here. Yeah, this is not quite right either. So if we treating this as a signed 16. Does give us a single byte load. If we treat it as an unsigned 8, that gives us the mask. But then this value is being stored off onto the stack, whereas ours is just being kept in V0. I think that's probably where we'll end today. So there definitely was some progress that could be made down here, and the PSP version is decidedly closer than the PlayStation version right now. I've mentioned this before, but many of these remaining weapon functions are there's just a lot of idiosyncrasies and a lot of odd construction that makes them more difficult to compile or decompile than the ones that have come before, and that's the reason that they're the remaining 10 that are left. So I'm going to keep working in this space, and hopefully we'll be able to get through the rest of this function tonight. And then we'll come back tomorrow and see if we have success or not. There are, I'll go to the GitHub repo. We do have, let's see, just a handful of these weapon functions left. Some of them are relatively close, and some of them are nearing PR, being worked on by other people. The next area that I'll probably continue working on is ST0, which is the prologue. There's functions there. There's both functions that need to be decompiled there, as well as a bunch of things that need to be named. And I don't know if you can hear my kids screaming in the background, but the joys of working at home. Things that just research and documentation of what those functions do in ST0 to be able to finish that out. There's a lot of cool stuff there that doesn't exist in other parts of the game, like we looked on Thursday at the background animation and how that the background gets pulled into the vortex and the functions around that. So we've identified what function is that does that, but it doesn't have a name yet. So giving that a name and using that then to help identify other methods and things like that, so that other people can understand what the code is for. If you want to know more about the Symphony of the Night Decompilation project, you can go to soten.z.dev, and you can find progress there. You can find a link to the GitHub repo that has all of the code that has been decompiled and merged up until this point. There's also a link to the Discord server where we are talking about things. If you've been there recently, there's been a lot of talk about licensing and what license we want this project to be distributed under. That has definitely been an opinionated discussion. I'll put it that way. But it's definitely a necessary discussion. A lot of decomp projects have chosen various licenses or not licensed, not specified a license at all. But we think it's relatively important that that the work of everybody be fairly used going forward. So, in addition to kind of politics of licensing, there's lots of discussion about what people have found in Symphony of the Night, how some of the things that I was struggling with today, how some of those might be decompiled, looking at the different versions of the game and where they diverge from one another. And then there's a reasonably healthy discussion about taking this code that we've decompiled and how to mod it and what that means for future of SOTN ROM hacking and mods, which I think is what we all want to eventually be able to get to, along with being able to target platforms maybe that haven't been targeted yet. So yeah, go to sotin.z.dev, go to the Discord, join us if you're interested in decompiling at all, or MIPS or PlayStation or PSP, even Saturn and Xbox 360. There's lots of discussion about all those platforms and how we can get back to code on all those for a code base that hopefully is mostly shared between them all. That's all I have for today. I hope everybody enjoys their Labor Day weekend and you get to grill and spend time with your family. That's what I'm going to do right now. So have a good day, everybody. See you tomorrow.